the big thing for you and the governor is really you want to debate.
Absolutely. We're dividing our campaign into two phases. By the end of September, we need to be polling well enough to be in the presidential debates. There'll be 3 in October for the president and 1, by the way, for the vice president. And I simply cannot wait to be able to debate against Vice President Biden. But we need to be polling well enough. And if we are, we're absolutely convinced that we will merit people's votes. We think that the rules will change, people will see us as viable, and they will flock to Governor Gary Johnson. Why? Well, you've seen him, and you know the man has no ego. He is the most qualified person to be president of the United States that I know of. And that's not because of so much what he says, although he really says good things, but it's because what he did while he was the governor of New Mexico. He vetoed excessive spending bills, left the state after 2 terms with a budget surplus of $1 billion, stands up, is courageous. You know where he stands. He pursues that. But he's also a coalition builder, that we will have a coalition government in Washington. And that means, yes, we'll have highly placed libertarians and independents, et cetera, but we'll also have Republicans and Democrats. So then when we have this paralysis that's going on there, one party's giving us trouble, we'll have highly placed people in our administration saying, Charlie, come on, go and talk with your colleagues. Tell them, this is a good idea. Embrace it. And anybody that embraces it will get lots of credit. We'll give credit for good ideas, credit for supporting good ideas. We will actually be functional. And we will submit a balanced budget. You know full well, Jim, they haven't even had a budget in Washington for the last 3 years. It's absolutely beyond irresponsible. It's virtually criminal. We will submit a balanced budget. We will bring our troops home from so many different places around the world where we're putting them in harm's way. We can't afford it. It's inappropriate. We're making people mad at us, et cetera, et cetera. Can't be the world's policeman. And we do have a plan, and I hope we can talk about it, for jobs here in the Midwest and all around the country. They talk about a little nibbling on the fringes. We have institutional change that will bring back millions of jobs to the United States of America. It goes on and on. It's really exciting.
Well, let's tell our listeners who Judge Jim Gray is and how did you get to this point?
Okay, well, sure. Well, I was the Navy JAG attorney, actually in the United States Naval Air Station in Guam and then in Lemoore, California. I was a member of the Peace Corps before that. After the Navy, I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I held the record, among other things, for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California. Thereafter was a private practice of law, and then for 25 years was a trial court judge in Orange County, California. And one thing that you really have to know is that in 1992, based upon what I saw in my own courtroom, where we're churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, I held a press conference, somewhat unusual thing to do for a trial court judge, stating my continued beliefs that the nation's policy of drug prohibition was not working. And I've been talking about this actively ever since. I've been on the O'Reilly Factor a couple of times and the John Stossel specials, etc. And that's how I got to meet Governor Johnson, because he, as the governor of New Mexico back in 1999, had a press conference saying, I've conducted an audit. This just isn't working. We must change it. And, of course, that got our attention. He had, as you know, no constituency to do that, no political benefit. It's the right thing to do, and he stood up with regard to it. I wrote a book released in 2001 called Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed. I asked him to endorse it, which he did. It was also endorsed, by the way, I am truly proud to say, by Milton Friedman, who's a hero of mine, George Shultz, the former Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, and Walter Cronkite. So I thought, get those 4 people together. That's pretty impressive stuff. But you have a man, Governor Gary Johnson, who, again, told me when he asked me to be his running mate, I said, first of all, one condition, and that is we run to win. None of this moral victory stuff, none of this making a good showing, planning for the future. He said, absolutely. And then, Jim, he told me something that will get my attention for the rest of my life and probably yours. He said, Jim, during the campaign as my running mate, if you disagree with me on some issues, feel free to discuss them publicly. I mean, that shows the absolute guarantee that he wants to get the best information, doesn't have any interest in it other than doing the right thing for the right reason.
Judge Jim Gray joining us here on WJBC and WJBC.com. He is the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party for the President of the United States, running alongside Governor Gary Johnson. I'm looking at the pamphlet you brought in. It says here, good government is easy. Watch. I don't know how. Is it easy?
Yes, it really is. There's a difference between simplification and simplistic. We must simplify. We've made government and life so complicated. Our tax system, and we can talk about that as well. In fact, let's talk about it now, that we're talking about jobs. And Romney and Obama are saying, oh, you're going to raise taxes, lower taxes. We are going to repeal the income tax. Now, that I don't have a soundbite. It's not a radical thing. We're going to go back to our roots. Before 1913, with the 16th Amendment, that's when we had income tax. What would happen if we were to repeal the income tax? Well, first of all, of course, the Government Accountability Office estimates that we spend today somewhere between $250 and $600 billion as companies and individuals keeping records for and preparing our taxes. That, of course, would be saved without even talking about what your taxes would be. We'll replace it by a retail consumption tax. But the huge issue is that today, with regard to our goods that are manufactured or agricultural, they have a competitive disadvantage here and around the world. Why? Because they paid taxes on them before they leave our shores as exports, competing with goods around the world that have not had taxes paid on them. So we'll level that playing field, help our exports enormously. Same thing with regard to the imports to our country. Those are coming from countries that have not had income taxes paid on them, competing with our domestic products and goods that have. So our competitive advantage will be much better. And then I was on a plane, and Jim, as you can imagine, I'm doing a lot of flying now. I can't remember where I was going or the rest, but I was sitting next to an executive from Nike, the shoe manufacturer, and I explained this to him, and he said, oh, man, this is tremendous, because do you know that if we were to repeal the income tax, most companies would bring their manufacturing back to the United States of America. What's that called? It's called jobs. It's a reverse of that outsourcing that now we're seeing. Back in the Midwest and everywhere else, we will rekindle that manufacturing machine. We can compete with anybody, as we know, as long as you have that level playing field. This is an enormously important thing that Governor Gary Johnson and I are committed to putting into play.
And you mentioned bringing jobs back to the Midwest in particular. How do you do that? I mean, the same way you're talking?
They'll compete. It used to be the Midwest had lots of manufacturing, talking Detroit, Cleveland, all these various other places, and there's no reason why they can't come back again. But, Jim, there are four, as best I can determine, four groups that are against repealing the income tax. Who might they be? Well, certainly those that are tax attorneys, tax accountants. H&R Block probably is not in favor of this. I understand. Second group, of course, are those that work for the IRS. That's, by the way, about a $30 billion budget every year that would be saved, and I can live with that too. The third is huge, and it's difficult. That is members of Congress. You must understand they have lots and lots of political benefits by voting for tax breaks for their wealthy constituents, and they don't want to give it up. So we're going to have to go over their heads. But when we win this election, we'll have a mandate like you really won't believe, and then we'll ask the people, if you have a member of Congress that is not supporting this, that member is putting his or her interest ahead of yours, better talk to him, better do something about it. And the fourth group are those wealthy constituents, those that have mastered the system, that have their lobbyists get those tax breaks for them. Think General Electric, by the way. And I am told that if we were to repeal the income tax, about 60% of the lobbyists in Washington would be out of work. Pretty good idea. We must do this. This will make us competitive, will bring back jobs. It's going to be sensational.
Well, when people hear, oh, we're going to repeal this or bring back or cut out this tax, they get nervous. Okay, then how do you pay for, hear the argument, how do you pay for our police?
Certainly.
How do you pay for roads, schools?
Certainly. It'll be tax neutral. We will have a consumption tax at the retail level, not the value-added tax. It gets too complicated and it's unfair. And it's not going to be minor. I mean, let's talk about it the way it is. Maybe somewhere between 15 and 20%. When you're going to buy your shoes, you're going to have that added on to it. But first of all, you understand that you're going to get a payroll check, and you're not going to have any of these withholdings for taxes, for Social Security, payroll tax, none of that sort of thing. So you're going to have a lot more money in your pocket. And secondly, of course, the wealthy buy more than the poor. But Governor Johnson agrees, and this is his idea, that let's say it's 20%. It'll probably not be quite that much, but let's say it is for purposes of our discussion. Then if you will get a rebate. Everybody, or at least every adult, will get a rebate every month of $200, which means that if you pay $1,000 in goods and services, you'll end up paying no taxes. Obviously, 20% of $1,000, $200, you come out even. You pay less than that, you actually make money on the deal. And after that, you do pay some. So these are things, and there are other things we'll have to iron out as well. Charitable deductions maybe, or non-processed foods, or even rent. Maybe rent over $600 a month, you'll pay some taxes, etc. But it is exciting. You look into it. I am convinced going back to our roots will make Thomas Jefferson and James Madison really proud of us.
And when you mentioned Social Security, no money will be coming out for that. So then what happens to Social Security?
Fair enough. Boy, you're getting right at it, aren't you, Jim? Good for you. And this is critically important. Now, we are libertarians. We believe in the value of contract. And the United States government has contracted with people. You give us, put this in, and you will be entitled to those things. And we will honor those. We'll probably, though, you just have to understand that when Social Security went into play in the 30s, life expectancy was much lower, maybe in the upper 50s, maybe 60, and now it's quite a bit higher. So we are going to have to adjust the entitlement ages, maybe from 65 to 70 over time, et cetera, which I think people will be willing to understand and respect. But then, and again, don't hold me to these cutoffs because we'll work with that, but say if you're 50 or older, you will get everything that you're promised. And we'll just take care of that. If you're 35 to 50, maybe you can opt out if you want to. You can be bought out on a one-time deal, and then you can make private contributions to funds that have been approved by some private conservative agency. So you're not taking a flyer and betting on the price of zinc in the future or something. But you can do that. And then if you're 30 or below, okay, we'll cut you off, and you can then start spending your money into something that you'll actually get back. Okay, so that will start working. But it's unfunded. And so we're going to need to, because when Social Security went into play, there was something like 220 people that were workers that were paying money into the fund to sponsor one person on entitlement. Now it's less than 3 to 1. So it isn't funded. And we'll tell the truth, guys. A lot of politicians won't do that. Al Gore was talking about a lockbox. There's no such thing except it's filled with government IOUs that are worth nothing. So how are we going to fund it? Honestly, I don't know in Illinois what the percentage of your real property in this state is owned by the federal government. I do know in New Mexico, for example, Governor Johnson's home state, it's about 85%. There is no reason for the federal government to own this land. And so I'll ask you and your listeners a question. Who takes better care of a house, an owner or a renter? And the answer to that's pretty easy. If you own the house, you're going to take better care of it. If you own this grazing land, you're going to husband it much better than if you lease it. You're not going to overgraze, etc. So if you sell this property, let's say we'll take all of it, and every year we'll auction off 10% of it. We will then take that money that is brought in. Maybe we'll share some with the states, etc., because it's their property of all things. Nevada is more than 90% owned by the federal government. We're not talking about selling national parks, that sort of thing. There are a lot of grazing land, woodlands, etc. That's what we will do on a one-time basis to fund Social Security. It'll work.
Judge Jim Gray joining us here again, the Libertarian vice presidential candidate here in the U.S. of A. And Judge, let me ask you, we hear about the argument for entitlement reform. We hear that it's a mantra of the Republicans, and you have I don't want to say class warfare, but you hear that term thrown out as well.
You might as well say class warfare.
Is that what you believe? That's really? Do you really believe?
I think politicians are trying to put one class against another, and I think
on both
it's disgusting. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, and that's not what we do. But we talk realistically. I already told you that Governor Johnson said that I'm free to discuss issues directly. We'll speak the truth. Jim, there's some problems out there. Let's recognize them. Let's define them. And then we're going to have to spread some pain here. We are in some trouble. But today, my generation has made such a mess of this financially, and it's our children that we're looking to pay it back. And as we sit here, our grandchildren are bankrupt. So it's time that we're going to have to share some pain, because we really are becoming Greece. If we keep going in the next 4 years like we have in the last 4 years, I'm not even sure it's salvageable. So we're going to have to face these things.
What about gun control?
It's a question of liberty. End of discussion. It is a question of liberty, and people should be able to own guns like they should be able to own other things, and held accountable for what they do. I believe in gun education. Honestly, I'm not a gun enthusiast, but it's a question of liberty.
But is there a line, is there a place, when you said end of discussion, is there a place where we can have a discussion on possibly the types of weapons people are able to buy?
I think that's inescapable, that you have to do something like that. I don't think people should own a bazooka, for example. You can own a Sherman tank, but whether you can have a 22 millimeter gun on it, So there's a discussion that should be had on that, of course.
But you're not. What about the assault weapons ban we're hearing about?
I don't think it works. I'm not really knowledgeable about one type of gun from another. I do know I've actually fired a Thompson submachine gun when I was in the Navy, and an M16, AK-47, even a recoilless rifle, for heaven's sake, in Vietnam. But I know that you can take a gun that's supposedly illegal, like an AK-47, and modify it so that you can pull the trigger lots of times and the magazines. We're going to bring in experienced people, and we'll talk about this. But fundamentally, this is a question of liberty.
How do you better the education system in our country?
Boy, what a good question to ask, because today, countrywide, our schools are failing our children. And this is one of our big issues. Let me ask again your listeners a question. Who is in a better position to decide where and how your children should be educated, you or the federal government? And I think that question is really easy to answer. The problem is that, we'll talk about shoes for a minute, the consumers decide where they want to go, what shoes they want to buy, how much they want to spend, and they're pretty much comfortable with that. And that's a consumer item that pretty much is purchased from the bottom up. That's the way all of our cars, whatever. From schools, it's totally different. The money is spent from the top down. It's spent originally from the federal government. They keep a bunch for administration, give it to the states, who keep some for administration, gives it to the school districts, same deal, the schools, same deal. Eventually it trickles down to the schools, the classes themselves. But if you give the parents the ability to say where their and how their school dollars are going to be spent, they're going to demand excellence. And then if your school, Jim, isn't working, what am I going to do as a parent? I'll talk to you maybe for a while, but if it doesn't work, I'm going to take my children off to a different school. So you're going to see people leaving your school naturally. What are you going to do? Well, either you're going to look to see what those other schools are doing and bring in some innovation and some change, or you're going to go out of business or sell to somebody else. And the answer to that is good. And then people will demand excellence and will receive it. I am absolutely convinced that if you go into this system, that we will return excellence to our schools within 4 years. And by the way, really importantly to discuss as well, what we're doing today is so inequitable that today if your children are going to a poor school in the public school, you take them out and put them in a private school, you continue to fund the public school, and then you fund the tuition for the private school. You're paying twice. Under this situation, you would not have to do that. So good schools will work. Good teachers will love this system. They'll be in demand. They'll make more money. They'll be able to teach. They'll be able to respond. And then other schools will come in. Maybe they'll teach computer science, or they'll do what people need to learn. It's going to be fantastic to bring back excellence to our schools. Only Judge Jim Gray and Governor Gary Johnson are talking about this. It's hugely important. We're going to put it into effect.
Judge Gray, thank you so much for stopping by. Before we go, anything else you want to let people know about?
Well, look, there's always more to talk about. Go to GaryJohnson2012.com. You will like what you see. This man is just one of us. And he says and we say that if he goes to Washington, we go. We will bring back competition. We will bring back excellence. We will reduce the obesity of government, the intrusion. We're coming at Obama from the left. We really do want to repeal the so-called Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, where our individual liberties are literally under attack. We really will, with regard to Mr. Romney, attack him from the right. We really will be financially responsible. We are in the mainstream of the political thought today in the United States. We are financially responsible. We are socially tolerant, and no one will say that both Romney or either Romney or Obama are both. We will do this. Get us in the debates, Jim. Tell your people that when somebody calls from a polling company, first of all, don't hang up, and secondly, say, we support Governor Gary Johnson. Your vote is your own. You can keep that to yourself. Get us in the debates. We will merit your votes. To the degree that, maybe final comment, I am absolutely convinced that everybody that votes for Governor Gary Johnson for president within 2 years will be absolutely proud that that vote had been cast. And 60% of the people that do not will avidly wish that they had. You're anxious to have that third party. You don't want to have all this bipolar politics that Obama and Romney would be doing. You have that choice. He is there. He is the real deal. Send us to Washington, put in that coalition government, and reclaim the excellence of the United States of America.
Judge Jim Gray, pleasure to meet you, sir, and thank you for the time.
Good luck to us all.